Good morning, afternoon, or evening. I'm your host, Tom Miller, and this is the South Texan News Desk. Now, before we begin, you've probably noticed that this is the first edition of the News Desk in quite a few weeks. For the most part, we are back on our regular schedule. We've just been working on the technical end of things to streamline the podcast and make it more accessible. The most notable change coming from that is that the podcast is now moving from being hosted on SoundCloud to being posted on our YouTube channel, the South Texan. And you can also find links to the past and future podcasts in the podcast section of the South Texan's website. It'll be in a box at the bottom of that page. Now, moving into campus news. We are currently wrapping up the week of homecoming and the 50th reunion of A&I's graduating class of 1969. Through the week, we've seen several of the traditional events that herald homecoming here at TAMUK, including the Fall Carnival and the Homecoming Parade. In this year's parade, TAMUK's Enrollment Management Department was voted the winners, with the Javelina Alumni Association in second and the Catholic Student Organization in third. As for the royalty, this year's homecoming king is Ivan Ibanez, and the homecoming queen is Ida Nisa Gonzalez, so congratulations to them. This coming weekend, November 1st through 3rd, we'll see the showing of Gravity, an original play by the TAMUK Theater Department's Corey Ranson. Recall that Ranson also created Junebugs, which was presented last year by the Theater Department. I personally enjoyed Junebugs, and I'm quite excited to see what Ranson has in store this year. On November 1st and 2nd, the show begins at 7:30 p.m., and on November 3rd, the show's final showing will be at 2:30 p.m. All showings will be in TAMUK's Little Theater, with tickets being $7 at the door. For any further questions, you can call 361-593-3401, and that will connect you to the theater department. They should be able to answer your questions on that. In volleyball, the Javelinas are still on top with a 16-10 overall record, but they'll be looking to break a 3-game losing streak in their November 1st game against West Texas A&M. Their most recent game was on October 26th, where they lost to the Texas Women's Pioneers 1-3. In football, the Javelinas unfortunately extend their losing streak to 6 games, after falling to Tarleton State 33-45. They're still entirely defeated in conference with an 0-5 record and a 1-7 record overall. In world news, we begin in South America, where we find that there's something to be learned in Chile. How quickly a small effort can grow into a large-scale movement. Recently, the Chileans started protesting against an increase in transportation fees in the country. That protest caught fire and swelled into a broad protest against general inequality and living conditions in the country. The protests are generally peaceful, but Chilean military have been occupied with peacekeeping efforts in order to curb looting, arson, and similar crimes done under the cover of the protest. Fortunately for the Chilean people, this protest seems to be coming to a prosperous end. President Sebastián Piñera has dismissed his entire governmental cabinet in a bold move, announcing to the Chilean people that he wants to implement the reforms that these protests have brought up. He also declared that martial law and states of emergency imposed across the country have been lifted. Of course, while these protests have gone better than, say, those in Hong Kong, the Chilean people are not out of the woods yet. What President Piñera says isn't necessarily what he will do. That, of course, is a separate thing that remains to be seen. But overall, the Chilean people may very well be on the edge of a new era of Chilean prosperity. Moving to the Middle East, we see another major victory for not only the Middle East, but for the entire world, as U.S. forces in Syria finally brought an end to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi on Sunday. Baghdadi retreated into an escape tunnel with U.S. military dogs on his heels after U.S. forces breached his compound. Baghdadi detonated a suicide vest, killing himself and causing his escape tunnel to collapse. Later on, DNA tests did, however, confirm the death to be al-Baghdadi himself, so fortunately he was not able to escape U.S. forces. None of the military dogs chasing him were killed in the tunnel collapse, although one was seriously injured. Overall, this marks another major victory in the fight against ISIS, building off the overall defeat of the pseudo-caliphate earlier in the year. The problem, however, is that ISIS militants do still exist in small pockets, and as long as they're out there, ISIS will still be trying to carry out their acts of terrorism. However, it would take a lot of coordination and resources that these little pockets certainly lack, especially with the death of Baghdadi. We end this episode of the News Desk in Britain, where you've probably heard a new wave of Brexit-related news recently. After assuming Theresa May's role of Prime Minister, Boris Johnson has also had to deal with Brexit, which still hasn't reached a definite decision. So far, Johnson has gotten the EU to agree to another delay on the ruling. This is important for those pursuing some way for Britain to exit the European Union while still getting some kind of severance. They don't want to leave empty-handed. If Parliament were to reach the cutoff date, they would be forced into a no-deal exit where Britain is forced to leave the Union with no severance. So now, with several issues to still iron out, probably the most prominent among them being the debate over where the Northern Ireland border will lie, Johnson continues to race against the clock on this deal. But the question is, where is the European Union's breaking point? Where do they start refusing to extend the deal period, and if Britain can't come up with anything, force Britain to leave without any kind of compensation? That remains to be seen. But for now, that's all we have for you this week. For more information about the goings-on here at TAMLK, check out the South Texan written right here at TAMLK, or check us out online on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.